Behind the political posturing in Washington this week lies what may be the beginning of a fiscal deal. The hot rhetoric on the fiscal cliff continued Tuesday in the Capitol, but so did work on areas of compromise. That's good news for Americans, and especially members of the House who have just 10 days left before their Christmas break. Heather Sells has that story.
Unfortunately, the Speaker's proposal right now is still out of balance.
In Washington right now, both sides are still trading barbs on the fast-approaching fiscal cliff. The pressure: reach a deal by January 1st, or cuts go into effect that could raise unemployment and force the economy back into a recession. But seemingly, the two sides cannot agree, especially when it comes to how to tax top income earners.
We're going to have to see the rates on the top 2% go up, and we're not going to be able to get a deal without it.
Tax increases he wants would fail to make even a small dent in the debt, but it would hurt middle-class businesses and the people who work for them.
Behind the scenes, however, insiders say the White House and House Republicans are beginning to identify areas of significant overlap, and these areas could form the basis for a final agreement on the fiscal cliff. So just what are these signs of hope? Both sides now concede that tax revenue and reduction in entitlement spending are essential elements of any deal. A likely scenario: House Speaker Boehner will yield on raising tax rates for top earners, and the White House will flex on Medicare and Social Security cuts. Already, the president says he's willing to raise the age of Medicare benefits to 67. The president also says he will consider lowering tax rates for the top 2% of earners not now, but next year, as part of an effort to close loopholes. And both sides are close, at least in theory, on cutting spending on a host of miscellaneous programs and fees. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Tea Party conservatives swept House Republicans into power just 2 years ago. Now GOP leaders appear to be sweeping some of those Tea Party lawmakers under the rug because they're too conservative. John Jessup has that story from Washington.
Tim Hillskamp is a Tea Party Republican who came to Washington on a mission to rein in an out-of-control government.
I was critical of the debt deal, which created the fiscal cliff. I was critical of the spending increases. I was critical of a lack of progress taking down Obamacare.
As one of Congress's most conservative members, his principles sometimes puts him at odds with party leaders. He was among the first Republicans to criticize Speaker John Boehner's plan to avert the fiscal cliff.
When you talk about $800 billion of new revenue, I don't see how you do that with some pretty large increases in taxes, and I've been very clear, as have most Republicans, that we don't want to raise taxes.
On the same day Speaker Boehner unveiled his counter-proposal to the White House plan, he broke some bad news to certain members in his conference. They were getting booted from their primo committee posts.
Really, it's a slap in the face of all young people who are out there thinking about being Republicans.
These four conservatives were kicked off their committees. Hillskamp and Amash, both freshmen, were removed from the Budget Committee, where they voted against the Republican budget created by Paul Ryan.
How much do you think this has to do with your votes against the Ryan budget?
Again, that might be part of it, of the reasons. We don't know.
They don't know because they weren't given an explanation. CBN News contacted Speaker Boehner's office to get some answers, but was only given this response: the Republican Steering Committee makes decisions based on a range of factors. With nothing concrete, Hillskamp wonders if his pro-life, pro-traditional marriage policies may also be to blame.
Perhaps that might be the reason that some folks do not like me to continue to speak up.
Whatever the reason, he labels it vindictive, noting how party leaders also stripped him from the Agriculture Committee. Hillskamp says his removal will mark the first time in 150 years that a Kansas lawmaker will not be on the roster.
Some have suggested this move shows the House GOP leadership, much like that song about Santa, is making a list and checking to make sure rebellious Republicans pay a price. For Hillskamp, he says above party, he'll remain loyal to the people who are most important, his constituents. John Jessup, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
And turning overseas now, nearly 300 people are reported dead after a powerful typhoon flooded much of the southern Philippines. At least 151 people died in the worst-hit province of Compostela Valley. Officials there fear the death toll will rise as rescuers reach other hard-hit areas isolated by landslides and flooding. Typhoon Bopha was one of the strongest storms to hit the Philippines this year. Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi is back in his palace. He fled yesterday after tens of thousands of protesters surrounded the building. They're opposed to his decree that gave him sweeping new powers. They're also opposed to the country's new constitution, which strengthens the power of Islam. The political crisis has divided Egypt into two camps. On one side are those who support Morsi, his Muslim Brotherhood, and their Islamic allies. On the other side are liberal groups, young people, and much of the public. Opposition groups are now deciding on their next actions. Pat?
Well, it's time for the United States to stand tall on this one, or else maybe behind the scenes give aid and comfort to those people who are sick and tired of the dictatorial tactics of the Muslim Brotherhood. But make no mistake about it, the Brotherhood wants an Islamic caliphate over the entire Middle East. That's their goal. They're not sweet moderates. They're the ones who appointed the PLO, and Yasser Arafat sent him up there into Palestine. They did the Palestine Liberation Organization. They have founded Hamas. These are people who are in league with terrorists. And Morsi is very extreme, and the people of Egypt don't want it. The United States should come to their aid as best they can without tipping the balance against them. So we were so silent when there was an outcry in Iran several years ago after that rigged election. Same thing with Morsi. It's time we stand up and not say, well, he's a partner for peace and all that nonsense. Well, something else that's happening that I think you'll find very interesting, Belgium, 25% of the people Muslim. Here's Lee with that story.
That's right, Pat. Belgium has sworn into local offices two officials from a new Islam party that supports Sharia law. This video shows Redouane Arouk taking the oath of office in Brussels. He has said he wants to turn Belgium into an Islamic state. One critic there disrupted the ceremony, shouting that Arouk will undermine democracy. Arouk admits he's taking a gradual approach, saying it may take decades to enforce Sharia law in Belgium, but he says the process has begun. Muslims make up 1/4 of Brussels' population. The U.S. could face a serious shortage of primary care doctors. The Journal of the American Medical Association finds that only 1 out of 5 medical students plans to become a general practitioner. Most intend to become specialists. The study says the U.S. will face a shortage of 50,000 primary care doctors in the next decade. That will happen just as Obamacare brings millions of new patients into the medical system, and that's expected to make the shortage even worse. Pat?
We have only begun to see the terror that is being unleashed upon us by this so-called Obamacare. It's going to be terrible. You will lose your health coverage. You'll lose your access to your primary care physician. You'll be standing in line for hours and hours to get treatment because there'll be so many people flooding in who've been brought into the system because of Obamacare. And the list of horribles goes on and on and on. And that's what happens when the liberals go crazy in Washington and inflict their philosophy on the general public. And this is the philosophy that the United States government needs to run health care. Big mistake.
A disputed California nativity scene is moving to private land. This comes less than a week after a federal judge ruled that Santa Monica, California, could ban religious displays on public property. A Christian group has been setting up the nativity scene in Palisades Park for nearly 6 decades. Lawyers for the group say the move to private land is not a resolution to the case, and they plan to file an appeal. House Speaker John Boehner hosted the lighting of the Capitol Christmas tree last night. Eagle Scout Ryan Schuster flipped the switch as the crowd cheered and the U.S. Air Force Band played "Oh Christmas Tree."
3, 2, 1.
The 65-foot spruce is from the state of Colorado. Representative Boehner says the 10,000 lights represent the everlasting light that entered the world with the birth of Jesus Christ. The tree will be lit each night until the day after Christmas. And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.